What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Apologies for the getup. I just filmed as soon as I got back from the gym. But yeah, as you can tell from today's title, I'm gonna be talking about kind of a sensitive topic, which is food addiction. And before I start, I just want to say I'm not a doctor. I'm not a clinical psychologist. Like, I don't really know any of these things, but all I can do is talk about my story and how I'm really starting to overcome what I believe to have been a food addiction. And yeah, hopefully it can help somebody out. Again, for any real medical advice or anything like that, go to your doctors, go to trusted professionals. I'm just telling you what has worked for me, and hopefully it can be inspiring or, at least a little entertaining. Now, I just want to say, like, with all other kind of like addictions or whatever, I don't think you're ever really over it. It's like something you struggle with. At least for me, it's something I'm going to struggle with for probably a majority of my life. And I think that's just a part of accepting who we are, where we're at in life. And so for me, this is not like I actually am 100% done and over this. It's more I've made a lot of progress, and I want to share about that progress. So truth be told, like, prior to the last several weeks of my cut, I don't know that it ever crossed my mind that I had a quote food addiction. But after a lot of self-reflection, after a lot of thinking, I realized that that's what it really comes down to. It's like, what is addiction? It's when you're chemically or even like mentally reliant on something and you need it, right? I started to look into a little bit of the stats around this whole thing. I found that food addiction is very much a real thing, that there's an estimated 70 million Americans that struggle with this on an everyday basis. And one thing I realized is, like other quote addictions, whether it's alcohol or substances, it's like a really chemical and mental thing. Like, you get a dopamine spike when you eat delicious food. Obviously, it can be quite addictive. And so I would say that the biggest thing that I've learned in kind of overcoming this whole addiction to food has really been about who I am at a core level. I don't know if you guys can really relate to this, but when I was much bigger, I was big in part because I loved food, and I still love food. Like, I very much considered myself a foodie, right? People would come to me asking for the best restaurant recommendations or what kind of foods they should try. And I took a lot of pride in that identity of being this quote foodie. And as a bigger dude, I found that it was hard to find things that made me feel special or important. And so being kind of this foodie type person was one of those things that made me feel important. And that sounds kind of sad as I say it out loud, but that's just my honest truth. And when I started my weight loss journey, because I wasn't going out to eat a lot, because I wasn't exploring new restaurants and things like that, it kind of begged the question, who am I without food? Who am I without this identity as somebody, as a trusted foodie or whatever, right? Like, who am I without these things? And I think that's when the work really started. And it's really when I started to feel like, oh wait, this was a much bigger part of my life and even like self-worth than I had realized. And so yeah, it runs quite deep, right? I realized that actually in a lot of ways I was giving up this former identity by embarking on this weight loss journey. And I think the biggest thing is I didn't realize the other identity I would find in this journey. And while I still love food and restaurants, I really don't identify as a foodie anymore. In fact, I think the biggest change that happened is I really don't live to eat anymore. I kind of eat to live. It's very functional. It's very practical for me now. So what identity have I taken on? What's the identity I found in this process, right? As I gave up one. And I think the biggest one is that I see myself as someone who's consistent, who's disciplined, and can do the things that they say they're going to do. And that was just someone I didn't know before, right? In terms of my own identity. And so, yeah, it's been kind of this whole change. I know that sounds kind of woo-woo, or it sounds kind of, I don't know, maybe crazy, but as I've gone through this journey, I've just really started to see myself as a different person. And that's how, at the end of the day, I think I've come to kind of quote, beat my food addiction. Okay, so that's great and all story time, but what are like the real practical things that I did that maybe other folks can be inspired from in really overcoming food addiction? I think the first one for me is, I call it almost like food rehab. And, like other addicts, a lot of people go to rehab to get rehabilitated, to take themselves out of their environments where they might, go backwards or whatever. For me, my rehab was basically eating the same food for 30 straight days. And, there's a lot of stories about habits forming in 27 days or whatever, this and that. But I think really what this did for me was kind of prove a question to myself. I think if you really love food, the idea of eating the same things over and over again for 30 days is kind of crazy. Like, it doesn't make sense, because if you live to eat, you're constantly looking for new foods. You want new flavors. You're constantly looking for that excitement that comes through food. At least for me, it was a big part of my addiction. I crave that novelty. I crave that excitement. And by me eating the same things for 30 days straight, I basically told myself I can find excitement and novelty in other areas of my life outside of food that really helped me mentally overcome the addiction, right? And so, like, for me, what are the things that replaced the excitement from food? I think it was like seeing results. That was a huge thing. Seeing the scale go down, or seeing myself get stronger, seeing my physique change. All of these things were even more exciting than that new restaurant or that cool food I saw on TikTok or whatever it might be. So I think kind of thinking about, okay, how do I take myself out of my behavior or my patterns? I consider maybe doing something like that, like just test yourself, see if you can do it, and then maybe break down that mental barrier, maybe in a little bit of an extreme way, but for me, it definitely helped. Number two, this is huge, is finding macro aligned alternatives to your favorite cravings. So for me, I realized, maybe like 45 days in, I really started to crave like texture. I wanted things that were crispy or like crunchy or whatever. I just missed that, because in a lot of the foods I was eating, everything was kind of the same texture. It's kind of soft. It's kind of easy to chew or eat. And so, I did stuff like, for example, I replaced a protein with this lightly breaded chicken tender that you can get at Costco. And that really changed the game for me, because I could stick to my macros, but still get what I wanted, which was that textural difference. And so, that's one big thing. Another thing is I started adding popcorn into my snacks. I started doing frozen grapes. All of these things are still very good for me and fit into my macros, but also kind of solve that kind of craving issue that I had. And even though it's not the most buttery, salty, like flavored popcorn, it's just straight up plain, no oil popcorn, to me, it gets the job done. And I think that's what's most important. And number three, I think this is actually kind of like more like a test than like a thing I did to get over my food addiction. But for me, it was going out to dinner with friends and not eating anything. This is really tough. This is tough because you want to enjoy experiences with your friends. You don't want to stand out. Like, you don't want to do anything that different than what they're doing. But I think for me, what it did was it proved that I can be in settings that I typically would like overindulge or eat way too much of, or even binge. And I could actually practice self-control. I could actually sit there and not just practice self-control, but I could still have a good time with my friends, like just ordering a Diet Coke or a Coke Zero or something. And it wasn't this terrible, horrible experience. And we make up scenarios in our brains about how excruciating or how painful these moments in life can be. But when you really show up, at least for me, I found that it wasn't so painful. It was still fun. I still had a great time talking with my friends and, laughing and whatever we do at dinner. And so that's a big, I think, way for me to have seen myself grow. That was really important. And so I think overall, this whole food addiction thing, while it is very chemical, like when you eat food, it triggers actual chemical releases in your brain. I think a lot of it, for me at least, was mental. A lot of it was behavioral. And a lot of it was basically me showing to myself that I could be a different kind of person. I could behave differently. And so hopefully that helps anyone out there who's kind of struggling with food addiction, or, I actually got a lot of comments in my last video, which is why I made this video about food addiction and just feeling like you can't get over that. And I think at the end of the day, it's more so about proving to yourself that you can. Because if you prove it to yourself, that's the most important thing, because you're going to be the one showing up every day, day in and day out. And so, hopefully some of these practical tips and my story can help somebody out there. And let me know if there's any other questions or, stories you guys have about food addiction and overcoming it. If you haven't already, please subscribe, hit the like button, get notified. I saw that over 70% of you haven't subscribed to my channel. I'd love to hit 1,000 subs by the end of the year, and I think we can do it. So, all right, help a brother out, do that. And that's it for this video. Until next time, peace.